The stage was set. The audience buzzed with excitement, the bright studio lights gleamed off polished floors, and cameras positioned at every angle prepared to broadcast the much-anticipated interview. The talk show was known for its sharp humor, but tonight's episode would be remembered for something else entirely. Richard Langston, the host, was a seasoned veteran in the industry. Known for his sarcastic wit and no-filter approach, he had built a reputation for tearing down celebrities on air. It was his style, one that had made him famous but had also earned him plenty of critics. Tonight's guest was Keanu Reeves, Hollywood's beloved enigma. A man known not just for his blockbuster movies but for his quiet humility and genuine kindness. As Keanu walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. He acknowledged them with a small nod and a modest smile before settling into his chair. Richard smirked, leaning forward with a cocky expression. "Wow, Keanu," he began, dragging out the name theatrically. "The legend himself. What's it like being a guy who's played the same character for, 30 years?" A few chuckles echoed in the crowd, but many shifted uncomfortably. They had seen Richard pull this routine before, but doing it to Keanu Reeves felt wrong. Keanu didn't flinch. He simply sat, his hands resting calmly in his lap, and regarded Richard with a look that was neither offended nor amused. It was simply patient. Richard, mistaking his silence for hesitation, pushed further. "I mean, don't get me wrong, John Wick is cool, but let's be honest, how hard is it to wear a suit, look serious, and shoot bad guys? Bet you don't even need to rehearse." The audience murmured. Some people laughed awkwardly, but others seemed uneasy with the blatant disrespect. Keanu finally spoke, his voice steady, thoughtful. "Acting isn't about pretending. It's about finding something real in the story." Richard scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Oh, come on, Keanu. Let's be real. You're no De Niro, no Pacino. You just got lucky." A hush fell over the crowd. The air shifted. The condescending smirk on Richard's face remained, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Keanu simply tilted his head slightly, considering his words. And then, with perfect calm, he prepared to answer. Richard Langston leaned back in his chair, satisfied with his opening shots. He had spent years perfecting his sarcastic, sharp-tongued persona, and it had served him well. Celebrities either squirmed, laughed it off, or played along. But Keanu Reeves, he just sat there, calm, unmoved. It was unsettling. Still, Richard wasn't done. He adjusted his tie and smirked. "You know, Keanu, I've always wondered, do you ever challenge yourself? Or is it just easier to stick with the whole, quiet tough guy, thing? I mean, we all have our comfort zones, right?" The audience let out a few chuckles, but they were nervous laughs now. The energy in the room was shifting. People weren't as entertained as Richard had expected. Keanu took a slow breath, his expression remaining neutral. He wasn't rattled. Instead, he gave a small nod, as if genuinely considering the question. Then, with the same quiet sincerity that made the world admire him, he replied, "Every role is a challenge if you approach it with honesty." Richard scoffed, shaking his head. "Come on, man, let's not pretend like you're out here doing Shakespeare." More murmurs from the audience. A few people frowned. Some even whispered to each other. It wasn't banter anymore. It was beginning to feel like an attack. Keanu simply smiled, calm, composed. "Storytelling takes many forms," he said, his voice even. "It's not always about monologues. Sometimes, the silence between words says more." The response was gentle, yet powerful. The audience clapped, this time not out of politeness, but in genuine appreciation. Richard's smirk twitched. He had expected Keanu to get flustered or defensive, but instead, Richard Langston shifted in his seat, sensing the energy in the room had changed. The usual dynamic, where he controlled the conversation and the guest played along, was slipping through his fingers. Keanu Reeves wasn't reacting like other celebrities. No frustration, no defensiveness, just calm presence. Richard forced a laugh, trying to mask his unease. "All right, so you're a deep thinker. I get it," he said, crossing his legs and leaning back in his chair. "But let's be real. Hollywood's about big names, not big hearts. You don't have to be the nice guy all the time, Keanu. It's okay to admit that maybe, just maybe, you've got a little bit of an ego, too. Keanu tilted his head slightly, as if truly considering the statement. His posture remained relaxed, but there was an undeniable weight in his presence. Then, with the same quiet sincerity that had been disarming Richard all evening, Keanu replied, "Success isn't about ego. It's about gratitude." The audience erupted in applause. It wasn't forced or polite, it was genuine. People respected Keanu's words. Richard, however, wasn't ready to let go of control. He let out an exaggerated sigh, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Gratitude, huh, that's a nice, humble answer," he said, sarcasm dripping from his tone. "But come on, man, you're one of the highest paid actors in the world. You've got luxury homes, cars, fame. Don't tell me that doesn't get to your head even a little bit." Keanu, again, did not react with irritation. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, looking Richard in the eyes. "The things we own don't define us," he said simply. "It's how we treat others that matters." A wave of murmurs spread through the audience. Some people even nodded in agreement. They had heard the stories. Keanu giving up millions from his paychecks to help crew members, riding the subway, treating strangers with kindness. This wasn't an act. For the first time, Richard looked uneasy. He had expected to poke fun at a celebrity and get laughs, but instead, Keanu had flipped the script. The audience wasn't laughing at Keanu, they were respecting him. And Richard was starting to realize he was the only one still playing the game. Richard Langston tapped his fingers against his chair, feeling the shift in the room. He had spent years perfecting his sarcastic, no-nonsense persona, but tonight, it wasn't landing. The audience wasn't laughing at Keanu Reeves, they were admiring him. And worse, they were starting to turn on Richard himself. He forced another chuckle, trying to brush off the tension. Okay, he said, waving a dismissive hand. "So you're Hollywood's saint. You don't let success get to your head. That's nice. But let's be honest, Keanu, people love a little drama. You're known as the nice guy of Hollywood, but doesn't that get exhausting? Isn't there ever a time when you just want to, I don't know, snap?" Keanu took a breath, his posture still relaxed. There was no anger in his eyes, just understanding. "I think we all feel anger," he admitted. "But the real challenge is how we choose to deal with it. Hurting someone just because you're hurting, that's easy. But kindness, that takes strength." The audience erupted into applause again. Some people even stood up, nodding along with Keanu's words. Richard's smirk wavered. He glanced toward the crowd, as if realizing, maybe for the first time, that he wasn't the one in control anymore. A woman in the front row suddenly called out, "This is why we love Keanu." And the crowd cheered even louder. Richard tightened his jaw. He had expected to have fun at Keanu's expense, to get some cheap laughs at the wholesome guy routine. Instead, Keanu had effortlessly turned the conversation into something real, something meaningful. And the audience had embraced it. Trying to salvage the moment, Richard let out a forced laugh. "Well, Keanu, I gotta say, you're making me look bad here." Keanu simply smiled, his eyes full of warmth. "It's not about looking good or bad," he said. "It's about listening." Silence fell over the room. The words hung in the air, powerful and simple. For the first time in his career, Richard Langston had nothing to say. A heavy silence filled the studio. Richard Langston had nothing to say. The usually confident host, known for his sharp tongue and biting humor, sat there, searching for a comeback that wouldn't come. The audience had fully turned to Keanu's side, their eyes filled with admiration. The moment wasn't just entertaining, it felt meaningful. Keanu hadn't argued, he hadn't insulted Richard, he had simply spoken truth. And that truth had left the host speechless. Richard cleared his throat, trying to regain some control. "Well," he said, forcing a smile, "I guess I should take some notes from you, huh?" Keanu chuckled lightly, his expression warm and genuine. "We're all learning," he replied. "Every day." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It had become something deeper, a moment of reflection. Richard exhaled and shook his head. He knew when he had lost a battle, and this was one of those moments. But strangely, he didn't feel humiliated. Something about Keanu's presence made it clear that this wasn't about winning or losing. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. "You know what, Keanu?" he said, his voice softer than before. "I think I get it now. You're not playing the game, because to you, there is no game." Keanu smiled. "Exactly." The audience burst into applause. Richard let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "All right, you got me. I'll admit it. I came into this interview thinking I'd get a few laughs at your expense. But you flipped the script on me, and I respect that." Keanu simply nodded, not taking pleasure in the victory, because for him, it wasn't a victory at all. It was just a conversation. As the show wrapped up, Richard turned to the camera. "Well, folks, I think we all got a little life lesson tonight. Maybe it's time we stop looking for flaws in people and start listening instead." The audience cheered louder than they had all night. Keanu smiled one last time before the cameras cut to black. And in that moment, Richard Langston realized, this wasn't just another episode. It was the one people would remember.